Let's get into it. Let's talk about real vampires. Get cozy because I have tea that I am going to spill. I am going to tell you the truth about real vampires. What are real vampires? The different types of real vampires, how they feed, everything I know about them, studies that have been done on them. And lastly, why I don't just knock the belief in real vampires. Quickly, if you don't know, my name is Megan. I'm a paranormal investigator from New Blood Universe, which is an indie paranormal production company. They're actually making a docu-series about real vampires. I researched the paranormal, folklore, cryptids, the fae, the occult, which has led me on my journey to my research on real vampires. So what are real vampires? They are not the same thing as vampires from legend and folklore. They don't turn into bats. They don't suck pomegranate juice from your neck. They don't have an aversion to garlic. And they're not immortal, at least not in the way that we believe in immortality. Real vampires are very similar to your modern day witch. And I will get into that further into this video. Real vampires are essentially everyday people who require subtle energy to survive. So they need more than food, water, sleep, a roof over their head. They need something extra, something like subtle energy. So how do they consume that energy? How do they feed? That's where the different types come in. One type that has been talked about a lot is the sanguinarians or sanguines. These are the real vampires that do in fact consume pomegranate juice. There is lots of different ways that they might feed. Some real vampires will actually use something like a scalpel and have someone who is their donor who consents to giving them their pomegranate juice, and they will use their mouth on that person's body to consume the pomegranate juice. It's hard to say all this on TikTok. That being said, there are real vampires who actually have donors that give them a good amount of pomegranate juice to last them a while. Those real vampires will typically freeze that pomegranate juice and then later put it in something like their tea. I'm going to stick with my Earl Grey. Then we have energy vampires, and these are real vampires that consume subtle energy. But there can be different ways in which they consume this energy. For instance, there are energy vampires who consume energy schmexually. They need to get down with someone in order to get that energy that they require. Then we have energy vampires who consume energy by doing something that is like a massage. It's similar to Reiki. Imagine that you as a person, you don't just have your blood, your bones, and your organs. You also have this energy within you. And they basically have tethers that they take, and they take your energy with those tethers. It's kind of hard to explain, but I can get more into that if anyone's interested. Many real vampires do have donors that they get this energy from, although some also do what's called ambient feeding. So the idea is that if there's a large group of people, there's basically leftover energy or kind of energy that sits on top of a crowd. A real vampire will take that energy into themselves. Real vampires are typically self-identified as such and as needing something like subtle energy to survive. There have been studies done on them, and I will get into that in a minute. In the vampiric community, consent is essential and is discussed thoroughly, meaning if they are going to be taking pomegranate juice or energy from someone else, they are close with that person or close enough that they're asking that person if they can take those things. It's mutually agreed upon. That being said, real vampires can be good, bad, or somewhere in between and neutral. They're people. Not all of them are going to care about consent. On the flip side, there could be real vampires who do not know they are real vampires and are acting instinctually to take others' energy. Another way that some real vampires feed is emotionally, and that is where things could get sticky in terms of being manipulative or things like that. Although I have met a couple of real vampires who did not care about consent, most of the real vampires that I have met and have spoke to in length really do value consent and are amazing people, some of which are my closest friends. Let's talk about some real studies that have been done on real vampires. There was a man named John Browning from Louisiana State University, and he studied real vampires for 5 years. He originally went into this study thinking that people who identified as real vampires were deranged people, and through his study actually wound up believing that they do have this need for pomegranate juice or subtle energy. He also thought that he was going to meet a lot of really enthusiastic True Blood fans or Dracula Dracula fans and stuff like that. But that just wasn't the case. Although there are many real vampires who also are lifestylers and go along with the lifestyle of having prosthetic fangs, wearing dark clothing, dressing goth or punk. There are many who do not dress, act, look like real vampires or vampires in the way that we think of them at all. They just look like your everyday people. John Browning did his study in New Orleans and predominantly of NOVA, the New Orleans Vampires Association. Most of the real vampires within that association during his study were normal in the eyes of society. They had friends, spouses, children, everyday jobs. Through John Browning's study, which I could do a whole other video about, he actually did believe that these people require the pomegranate juice or the real energy to survive. Now, of course, there are people who claim they are real vampires and that require pomegranate juice to survive, and that's just not true. There are people out there who are faking it, who are playing the part, dressing the part, wearing the prosthetic fangs, and saying that this is something that they are that they truly are not. However, a lot of the people who identify as real vampires are not screaming this from the rooftops. They really do keep to themselves and don't want to be judged by others. I have done a video on real vampires before, and a lot of people suggested this disease that they think a lot of real vampires have. I don't know how to pronounce that word. However, a lot of these real vampires do not have that disease. There was another study done by Dr. Williams of Idaho State University, and he found no evidence of psychiatric issues in self-identified vampires. So for the people who require pomegranate juice to survive, the reason they have self-identified as vampires is kind of obvious. Drinking pomegranate juice is what vampires of folklore and myth do. However, there's more to it than that. The psychic vampires that identify as such identify in that way because they require subtle energy or something from another person that they need to consume. However, there are a lot of real vampires who do not like the term real vampires because the word vampirism suggests a predatory nature, and that's not always the case, especially for those who value consent. Now, I know there are so many people who watched my previous video about real vampires or New Blood Universe's video about mine and Fen's encounter with real vampires in New Orleans, or people who have been watching this video who think I am absolutely bonkers. How can I be talking about this? How can I believe in this? Let me start off by saying I am a hopeful skeptic, meaning I don't necessarily believe everything that everyone tells me, but I do think that you can't just dismiss everything, and I'm going to get into why. There are things that I believe in, okay? I 100% believe there's aliens out there, okay? And I did way before the government ever said, hey, by the way, guys, yeah, there's UFOs and all that stuff. Believed in it way before then. Secondly, I think that ghosts are probably real. I've had some really strange experiences that make me think they have to be. I believe in manifestation. I believe that you get what you put out into the world. I believe in vibes. I believe that you can sense the feeling or emotion of someone without them telling you. And to some people, those things are crazy. Those things are magic or not real. Those things are not believable things. Or real vampires is just taking it a little too far to some. And I understand why that is a frame of mind, and skepticism is really important. That being said, I say this all the time, magic today is science tomorrow. Let me give you an example. When you think about vibes and how you can feel the vibes from someone, you can go into a room, you can tell someone's pissed off, even though they haven't said they're pissed off, or you can tell someone's sad, even though they haven't said they're sad. Well, some people might think, yeah, but that's not because you're feeling their vibe. That's because of their body language or the tone in which they speak. But there's more to it than that. There was a study done where they had two separate groups of people. One group was running and working out and sweating into their clothes, and that was it. That's all they were doing. They were having a little workout sesh. The second group of people were doing the same thing, but they were watching, I believe, horror movies. At least they were watching something that was inducing anxiety within them. They then had another group of people who smelled the dirty, sweaty clothes of those who had been running in both groups, A and B. The group of people that were running and and sweating and just having a regular old workout, those clothes just smelled sweaty and gross to the people who were sniffing them. However, the people that were sniffing the clothing of those who had induced anxiety during this research had anxiety themselves just from sniffing the clothing. There is so much of our brain that we don't use. There's so much that we don't understand about ourselves. That study right there to me suggests that we can smell some kind of vibe or feeling or emotion. Like emotions might have a scent. I am not a scientist. I am not a doctor, but to me, that is what that suggests. And it's very interesting because people who would dismiss that, like, oh, you can't just tell what someone's feeling by being in the same room as them if they're not giving you off the body language, if they don't have a certain tone. Well, maybe you can. Maybe you can smell it. That was magic, but now it's science. To not believe that we give off some kind of energy is, in my opinion, closed-minded. The reality is that there is so much that science has not yet discovered. And in the realm of energy work or the supernatural or the paranormal, research is often frowned upon or ridiculed. This is just a great example of why I keep an open mind and don't just automatically dismiss things. I don't automatically believe in things either. However, I like to have an open mind and discover for myself. Let me know in the comments what you want to hear more of. I can talk more about the study that John Browning did. It's really interesting. I can talk more about feeding. Let me know what you want to hear about. Let me know if you've had any encounters with people that you think might be real vampires, because let me just tell you, you might not have any clue that you spend time with a real vampire. There's a lot of them. Anyways, that's it for this one. See you next time.